the continuation of our Jurassic Park episode. Remember, everything's shit, and in this episode, everything's doomed and shit.
Welcome to the Spoiler Podcast, and today, myself, my co-host Dakota, we're going to be reviewing Melancholia in celebration of Earth Day. It's actually kind of coincidental, but I visited my college town, Oshkosh, and one of the stores there was having like Earth Day sales and stuff. So I got a free t-shirt from them. So y'all can just check out Satori Imports if you live in the area. They're a pretty cool company and they're like local, and unfortunately their branch in Madison, their sister store in Madison, had to close down recently is what I heard. But Satori is the original. They're established 1969, downtown Oshkosh. They do still have the one down in Milwaukee. Kind of a bummer, but free advertising. Go see them. There's Satori Imports, downtown Oshkosh. Melancholia came out in 2011, which was just a couple years, I believe, after Antichrist. Stars Kirsten Dunst, Charlotte Gainsbourg, Kiefer Sutherland, Stellan Skarsgård, Alexander Skarsgård. The movie basically starts with this very kind of artistic super slow-mo, which he had done some of this in Antichrist.
Yeah.
But he really turned it up a notch as far as like
longer, at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
In Melancholia, because like this is like the easiest thing to spoil because the beginning of the movie is also the end of the movie. We begin when the planet Melancholia behind me colliding in Earth, the end of the world. So from the very beginning of the movie, the audience knows how that portion of things end.
Well, if you know Lars von Trier, then you could probably assume it's going to be the worst possible ending. Otherwise, it's very surrealist, and there probably maybe is some doubt. I mean, it's very surreal and hallucinatory almost. I remember that my first introduction to like Melancholia was Sai sent me like a trailer. And he was just like, what the fuck has happened to indie film? Because like it starts off as like kind of like a marriage drama, and then like Kristen Dunst has energy roots coming out of her fingertips in the trailer. He's just like, what the fuck is this? But I watched around Thanksgiving of 2011, so it hadn't come out on home video yet. So, but I really loved it. And then in the course of his work, what they do, this is super depressing. So they'll destroy DVDs and Blu-rays, right? If they can't sell them. But because he takes care of the mentally disabled and, the old or whatever, elderly. So they'll give free Blu-rays away. And what he's able to do is kind of salvage some of those Blu-rays and DVDs for free. But I mean, they literally destroy these things. And that was part of his job, was digging through the pile that they're going to destroy and picking out movies. They destroy it all. And I'm like, God, that's the most tragic shit I've ever heard of, It's just, that just sounds just fucking wasteful as fuck. Like, speaking of like just destroying things, and it almost makes more sense in this case than the Blu-ray side of things. But like when COVID happened and basically the meat processing plants and everything were still, they had to like cut their staff by like 90%. I heard about that, where they just couldn't like the logistics of it didn't work out.
So basically like they just killed way more animals than they processed, because these big corporate farms can only have to like intake and outtake at the same rate at the consistent, like that is the economy of things that is just like set up within that sort of system of goods to food to animals to birth to
that's it. Logistics are complex, and like people always fail to factor that in. So it's like just because you have something doesn't mean you can get it to the people
But-
that need that something.
But it's also not like Blu-rays like go bad. Like,
No.
you know what? Or,
Yeah,
and
they
you
got-
can reuse
yeah,
the
because-
cases.
Yeah, it's a stupid thing where it's like they can't give them away for free, so they're left with no other recourse than to destroy them. Because if otherwise, I suppose people would just go, "Well, I'll wait till it's fucking free," and they can't sell off the remaining copies, But so yeah, God, I mean, it's just tragic to me. I do get it.
Do they at least reuse the cases and then just
No, it all. I think
or
it
wipe
just all
the-
goes into a recycling heap, and they yeah. So
they melt shit down, or I don't
or trash. I mean,
like a landfill. Like,
I think so. Yeah, and it just breaks
man,
my fucking heart. I know, but they have to like physically destroy them before it goes into the landfill because otherwise people would loot them. I think is how that goes. I'm like, God, I'd be one of those people. I don't care if I get crushed by some giant magnet. I'd be in that fucking landfill digging up all the fucking Blu-rays.
Just when the world is like fucking the road.
Yeah, that'd be completely what I would do.
I mean, the water's no good anyway. I guess.
Yeah. Shut up, kid. I got fucking Melancholia on Blu-ray. It's a fucking masterpiece. Shut up.
But so yeah, we have this very like abstract kind of super slow-mo of the world ending. There's birds falling out of the sky, which I don't think a lot of this movie we have to like suspend like the science nitpicks. If the planets are that close, and Melancholia looks at least 20 times bigger than Earth.
Right, it's like Jupiter or some
So
shit.
which planet's gravity just starts taking over, and do the birds fall upward towards Melancholia?
Yeah, I didn't think of that. That could happen.
That part doesn't bother me so much, but the part I am a little bit questioning is, it was hidden behind the sun. Well, at least once a year, you're going to be on the other side of the sun. Like, maybe Lars von Trier really thinks the Earth is the center of the universe, though.
Well,
I'm kidding.
It's called like the axis of evil, right? Where in all of the universe, there's, this is so many years ago, but there are people who believe that as absolutely unlikely as it is that the Earth is actually the center of the universe and it is the axis of evil.
It fits into the Melancholia theme.
Right.
That's what it sounds like. I'm not sure what's all in that, but
but I think for like this whole thing feels like a clinical depressives fantasy version where everything is affirmed, and so yeah, that's kind of how I take this movie, what if all your delusions of apocalypse were confirmed, then like
and then it turns out that all your ambitions and hopes and aspirations were the delusion.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of what this movie's about. It's pretty depressing. But before we really get into it, just want to remind you guys to check out the Spotify if you're watching on YouTube, and check out the YouTube if you're listening on Spotify, because both are good for different reasons. Definitely our earliest videos are probably best on Spotify, because our audio is always pretty good. But sometimes the internet was really bad.
But there were moments that do rely kind of on a visual element. So, but I think people would understand that listening to it,
Yeah,
so.
and we do have some educational bits every now and then. But anyway, the part 1 is titled Justine. And there's only 2 parts in this Lars von Trier film.
Really only 2 chapter titles, really. I don't think he introduces the prologue as prologue. It's just Justine and Claire.
Yeah, and he doesn't call it an epilogue. It's just, the end is just still Claire.
Right.
The movie really begins with a limo backing up. Justine, and we learn their names later on, but Justine and Michael have just been married, so they're in their just got married limo, and the limo's backing up. And at first, Michael's kind of annoyed, and she's a little bit annoyed, but she starts like thinking it's really funny because like a certain like element of chaos or imperfection in the world on her most perfect day or whatever,
Right.
like shows up, but like she can't stop laughing. And it's honestly one of the happier scenes we see her in the entire movie is
Mhm.
when the thing that goes out of plan. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, so you're definitely catching on to like the only other moment I can think of, at least during the wedding, where she legitimately smiles or laughs, is when he decides to swig. I think it's Crown Royal, and because that's
Yeah,
yeah,
because she takes like she swigs some Crown Royal, and like I think some people see her and like it looks like, oh, she's
right.
drinking a lot, like, oh, she's not happy, she's gonna go crazy. But
He follows it up.
he
Actually,
doesn't, they don't
drinks a
have
little more.
they don't have a good marriage, but I don't he's Michael's definitely not a villain.
No,
Um and like you know that like a lot of people around her do sympathize with her. She has a history of depression. It's brought up vaguely at the beginning, and maybe like
it's really
bipolar.
ambiguous, but I think for me, the moment where that became apparent was she was like, "Well, what did you expect?" I mean, behavior like this probably doesn't manifest itself out of the blue. So, although this is kind of the first we're seeing as the audience, it's highly unlikely that there were other episodes kind of like this. And so it's really the only real connection I can think of in that whole marriage sequence, which goes on for a very long time, that they legitimately have, because it
Yeah,
is on
and
plan.
it is kind of sweet because like he drinks even more and makes a bigger fool of himself, and
Right.
you could kind of tell like maybe he's done like you said, like maybe not like in a big wedding or something, but maybe he's done something like that at a restaurant if she got upset or something, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like how they live with, depression, I suppose. Like, yeah, how the melancholia. Her sister is named Claire, and she's played by Charlotte Gainsbourg, who's been in Antichrist, Nymphomaniac.
She was kind of Lars von Trier's muse for like at least three movies. She's very, I don't know, I mean, very good, So,
Yeah, and they seem to work well together, her and
yeah,
Lars von Trier. Kirsten Dunst, I know, like she had said that she had like a fine working relationship with him. I mean, it's not across the board, like, but he's definitely had a complicated history with his actresses in the past, to say the least, I would say.
he's a problematic asshole. But I mean, I know it's cliche, but he does seem to be actress oriented. Like, I mean, where he gives these amazing roles to women, and they lead the movie.
But yeah, one thing I wanted to point out really quick is that like the kid, like Justine's nephew, uh, like in Lars von Trier movies, there always seems to be a little boy that I feel like is like a subconscious like him,
Yeah.
where and it seems kind of obvious, and like this, and he's always a little creepy too. In this movie, he like immediately gifts Kirsten Dunst's character a knife, like, you creepy fuck.
Well, I mean, I don't they use that dagger to cut down, sort of those trees or whatever
I
later on.
think so.
Yeah, and she's on
So,
steel breaker, and this is probably some kind of history they have, but
and so this party is going on. Also, John Hurt plays Justine's father. His character's name is Dexter, and he's just kind of like more of like a silly kind of fun dad type that doesn't really have ambition or any, like, this really doesn't have a worry in the world type. Um, like he plays a joke on the waiters by like shoving spoons in his pocket and continues to ask for spoons, and they keep giving him
that's
spoons.
just see how much he can get away with. Yeah. So
Yeah, that was just a good device just to quickly be like, hey, this is what the upbringing was like. And then like all the toasts in this wedding party are like super toxic. Dexter makes a toast for, his beautiful daughter, blah blah blah, and then in the middle of the toast starts talking shit about his ex-wife.
then she retaliates. Yeah, yeah. It's and then later, Claire is like, "Oh, don't make a scene." I'm like, "Oh God, you couldn't make a bigger fucking scene than the scene that was made between the parents."
That's a good
So
point. Yeah,
yeah,
that she wasn't even being that big, and Claire is also like kind of this perfectionist sort of structured thinker where, you know, you want to get married and you want to do this, you want to do that, you want to have nice things, you want to have a really perfect wedding. She's fully bought into kind of the illusion of life, I suppose. But we see that the mother, because their parents are really different, because their mother doesn't believe in marriage, but she also believes in structure. So like you can definitely see that Claire took up a lot from her in that way. Like she believes in ambition, she believes human things matter like that.
That's what I remembered, but like I see, I like looking at her, I'm like, how the fuck did you ever survive any kind of aristocratic lifestyle? Because she seems so adverse to that at every turn throughout the movie.
Oh, I think it's more like she may have changed her mind after having been divorced from the Dexter.
Well, yeah, when he even seems more like, I don't know if he's like kind of the starving artist, free lunch type, or something like. But he seems even more unstable. Like I don't know. The parents are just a fucking nightmare. Like I mean, I don't. Yeah. So it's not like a big shocker when Justine starts to kind of spiral or whatever you call it. So
Jack, who is played by Stellan Skarsgård, who plays Alexander Skarsgård, who are real life father and son. He's the groom's father, but he's also Kirsten Dunst's
right, yeah, no, I
boss.
got that. So that's what I wasn't sure. Like I thought he must be, but the way he talks throughout that whole, like I mean, like his nephew, he has like no regard for,
Yeah.
and so
That's actually pretty funny at times.
right.
Her parents are fighting. Michael's dad is basically not really like, he's complimenting her or whatever, but it's about like, oh, what good a worker you are. Here's a promotion. Here's this, here's that, like materialistic kind of things or whatever. Even with, when your life is supposed to be perfect, like depression doesn't give a shit. You know what I mean? She's getting married. She has a promotion to a job that we assume she likes, because it's like an artistic outlet at least.
Well, I mean,
Well,
hardly. We see kind of an artistic image, but it's marketing, which is about as
yeah.
soulless as it could fucking possibly get. So,
well, that's the sad truth. Is a bunch of artistically minded people get thrown through the ringer of advertising.
yeah, I can't think of anything more lifeless. But
Yeah, and you're right. It is kind of weird that like right after these scenes where their parents make like these like kind of conflicts, right after this, like Justine like is feeling like, having like an episode, and then walks away from the dinner, and Claire's like, just don't make any scenes. So yeah, that is kind of weird that like right after that happened, Claire was like, don't make any scenes.
well, and I mean, she says I'm not doing anything, but she's like, well, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
so. That definitely implies that this has happened before. Like she knows where this is going, and
And Justine was late. They both were like 2 hours late, but
that
just because of the limo.
yeah, but that becomes throughout the wedding. She becomes late for a lot of the events. But
Justine just goes away to get away from it all. And I don't know the dynamics of peeing in a wedding dress in a bathroom, but it almost seems easier to do it at a golf course. So that there could be some truth to that scene of just like squatting down in the middle of a golf course and making it happen. But regardless, she's sick of it, and she looks at the stars, and she kind of gets like a sort of vibe with a star that that is kind of alluded to earlier. That's like distant but moving in some way, or
right,
appearing to be larger.
yeah, but they do give a name to it, and that changes to Melancholia, but I don't understand why. But yeah, well, so okay,
Well, I think they think it was a different star, but it was actually a planet that they hadn't known about or something. So then they gave it a new name. I don't know.
right. Well, you know, I mean, things happen like that where you have your kind of scientific name and then you have your general name, you know.
Oh, right, that's true. And then Michael toasts. Like a pretty sweet, like groom toast or whatever. Seems honest enough. Kirsten Dunst is obviously great throughout this movie, and I think it's the best she's ever been in a movie that I've seen.
Mhm.
So it's, that goes without saying, but I will quick mention that the supporting cast, like Charlotte Gainsbourg and both of the Skarsgårds, are very good. So yeah, Michael toasts, they dance, they seem to have a good time, but she's kind of just putting on the facade. Even after like that dance and everything, she puts the kid to bed, that
Oh,
same kid, and she like falls asleep in the chair next to the kid. And I thought it was really clever because Claire walks in and is like, "You should be at your wedding," when really Justine is taking care of her son more than Claire is. You know what I mean?
yeah, that comes up towards the tail end of the film. Yeah, yeah, no, right.
She's too kind of in her head of like, got to do this, got to do that, got to do this, got to do that. That like she doesn't see what's right in front of her. Like that does, like you said, come into play later on in the movie.
Right.
And after she puts the kid to bed, it's more and more obvious that Justine is depressed. So she takes a bath, and that's kind of established as like one of her comforts. Like
Yeah.
she would probably always use that to meditate and just chill and take a bath. Uh, and the funny thing is, Gabby the her mother is bathing too at the same time in a different room. And John Kiefer Sutherland is like mad that shit's not going well, and he paid a lot of money for this wedding, and he's knocking on all the doors, and none of them will come out.
Right.
That's brought on throughout John's character. He's always worried about the most. He's even more practically concerned than Claire and the others, because like he's all about like, how much is this going to cost, blah blah blah, like, very calculating. He's a curious mind, but he's also like calculating in a kind of an overly structured way, I suppose.
Sure.
He like throws Gabby's stuff out of the out of the mansion or whatever it is, and immediately behind them comes like an usher of some type or like a waiter of some type to pick it up. Like this kind of shit happens all the time.
Right. Yeah, we hear that later with Charlotte Gainsbourg. Or I think no, maybe it is Justine that John tries to throw the mother out all the time, you know, 'cause
Mm-hmm.
you can imagine why. I mean, she's insanely problematic. But yeah,
John also says to Justine at some point in like kind of a like side room or whatever, you should be happy. But his first reasoning is not like you should be happy for you. It's like, you should be happy. I paid so much money for this. And it all comes
I mean,
back to money. It all comes back to how she serves them. And I think that just like plunges her further and further into her depression.
yeah, I mean, well, yeah, that seems to be the big thing. I mean, the wedding goes on for quite a long time, probably the larger half of the movie, and I mean, you get the sense that it's like it's supposed to be about her, but it's really not about her at all. You know, through the, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's life, you know. But it seems to be really honing in on that, the kind of the absurdity of that this is her big day, but it's not her day at all, you know. And right, so yeah, and it just kind of hits that and hits that and hits that till she really starts to go over the edge towards the later half of the wedding.
And then Jack introduced, you alluded to him earlier, introduced him to Tim, who is Jack's nephew.
He has little regard for her, despite that.
Yep, he has very little regard for her. He's like, I just hired him, and if he doesn't get a tagline from you tonight,
Right.
he's fired. So he's gonna follow you around. And it's just such a creepy, weird thing to do. As like being like a boss and everything, like just it
Great.
just
Well,
that's one of the weirder dynamics in the movie.
yeah, well, no, I mean, and you see that guy kind of carry that out. I mean, well, just how
Mhm.
awkward it is, you know?
But after that's introduced, Justine has a fight with Claire, in which Claire also says, "You should be happy. Why aren't you happy?" And Justine says, "I'm trying." Like this is her trying to be happy and trying to, control herself for this night, but it's too much for her basically. And she goes to confide in her mother. So like in 3 scenes in a row, she sees like 3 or 4 people that just have the worst possible reaction to
Right.
her.
Yeah.
Because like the mother's like, stop dreaming, like you're not depressed, just stop, like basically like pick yourself up by your bootstraps type of shit. Like or like just kind of almost more of like fuck offish though. But
It's so, it's sort of almost a thing you admire where it's like, oh, just go do whatever you want. But, I mean, it's not tremendously useful, you know, at that point in time, the whole time. This is actually, it's probably the least useful time in the world for, just fuck off and do your own thing, right? I mean, you can kind of see yeah, the residual effects of, being well, she has two cool parents, right? The one who just is like, yeah, fuck off and do your own thing. And then you have John Hurt, who's like, I love you, sweetie, but, fuck off and leave me alone. So, it's like, it's like kind of a combination of those two. And yeah, and then her husband, who, like you said, isn't bad, but just kind of misreads the timing of things and doesn't quite have it all. I mean,
yeah, he's not the most emotionally intelligent, but he spent so much time with her that he can at least kind of subside some of the big depression waves with like comedy or whatever. Um,
right, but he does.
Making a goof of himself and all that. But yeah, he's not a psychologist by any means, and he doesn't, realize that the marriage itself is like a bad idea, and that like it's like a corporate marriage almost more with like that could have been almost more motivated
Well,
by
there's that,
the
but you also
father.
hear it throughout the film that the most people have to say really is, Justine's incredibly gorgeous. She's gorgeous. She's beautiful, and he probably overlooks a lot of those problems and tries to make it work, but ultimately it falls apart, and you can't really fault him. But I think there's that final line where she says, "What did you expect?" And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's, he
Mhm.
tries too hard to grab onto something that's clearly pretty uncontrollable, and yeah, it collapses. But I don't know.
And there's even like some weird expressions of like kind of what's also going on in the movie, because like they set off these little like hot air balloons, one out of like every 8 of them burn to the ground, and that's symbolic maybe a little bit of like how some of them can like have their aspirations uplift them, or have their like ideas of love uplift them throughout like their entire life, and then some people are like, fuck no, it's bullshit, like and they just like
There's stuff
yeah,
there. Yeah, I mean,
it's like a tiny symbol, like it's not a big deal, but like I think that is kind of the thought going into it, maybe, or at least just the expression of an imperfection at the wedding, and
yeah, and there's a lot of
pissing Claire off more, I
But
guess.
it's a lot like our kind of our Jurassic Park video, and in terms of like there's the big plan, and then there's everything working against that, and it
Mhm.
doesn't really matter what we plan, or our ceremonies and practices and whatever, like nature, which is, I think, Lars von Trier again and again makes kind of the case that is evil, doesn't really have any regard for our plans, like it doesn't really care.
And then like they're even about to like have like their wedding night together and start to have sex, but she can't like connect emotionally and asks him to stop, and they eventually stop, and like she gets up
It's
and
kind of unfortunate because he probably got a little too drunk to really register what she needed. Is kind of the sense that you get.
yeah, again, the emotional intelligence, and a lot, like you say, a lot of that could be just him being too drunk. But yeah, and she immediately walks out and goes to get some air at the golf course again. And then Tim is following her because Tim's been following her all day,
Right,
all
because he
night.
has to, because
And
it's
then
his
and
job.
then and then she just fucks him because it's almost like she feels like everything around her is so artificial that she wants to prove that to herself, where it's like, see, like I can fuck anyone I want on my like wedding night. Like that's how artificial this wedding is. That's how artificial like fucking life is. Like that's
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the central idea, whatever happens throughout this whole wedding ceremony, which goes on for like probably the larger half of the film, is that there is order and ceremony and plans, and there's chaos and spontaneity, and that is time and again what she responds to and tries. Yeah, I mean, throughout the course of this wedding, it grows gradually more and more extreme. So I mean, there's a scene where she rearranges all the books in that room, which later in the clear half of the film, she falls asleep in that room, which is like disorder embodied, because she opened all the pages of the books to obviously random pages, and switched them all around. And
the limo, that's what she gravitates to, like the spontaneity of the limo driver
yeah,
sucking.
actually, now that you mention, yeah, I mean, she seemed genuinely happy, that it was something that didn't go according to plan.
Yep. And then, she always like gravitates and like wants Melancholia to happen. She basically tells off Jack, so her boss, her husband's dad.
Mhm.
She basically tells him off that like he's a despicable person that only cares about money and blah 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 blah. You only care about your power.
Yeah, because he's trying to leverage Tim throughout the whole thing. Like, if Tim doesn't get that tagline out of you, he's going to lose his job. Although, in all likelihood, Tim's probably going to lose his job anyway, just because he's just there as a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And her saying that ends the marriage, really, because she doesn't actually have a breakup scene with Michael. It's just like the end is just kind of like, oh, my dad's leaving and I got to go with him, and because you pissed him off.
Yeah, and that would certainly be an awkward position. But I mean, but I think there's just a general sense of decline throughout the whole marriage ceremony too.
That's true. Yeah. And
So
then the way the wedding night ended and everything. So yeah, it was, it's just such an artificial marriage, and she sees right through it. And
he says things could have been different, and she said, "Yeah, they could have been, but what did you expect?" So, to me, that implies it's not immediately obvious what that means, but to me, it's like, well, again, this behavior didn't manifest itself out of the blue. He's probably encountered this before, and if that's the case, then yeah, I mean, this is probably only ever going to go the way it did. I don't think it's a singular episode. I think he was trying to grab onto something because it was above what he could,
he wanted to feel like he could fix her, or it could just all work out. But
and it's clear it doesn't really mean anything to her. It's all, so.
And in relationships, people constantly try to like go into it trying to fix each other, when really it's like, all right, you can either live with their faults or you can't. I feel like you're not gonna. I don't know how much people actually change each other.
Well, they don't, but
Yeah.
also, yeah. So,
well, that's my point. Yeah. Tim hits on Justine another time, and it's even almost funny because he's just like, well, I see that you're out of a job and you don't have a husband anymore. So what
I can't blame him for trying. I mean, this is obviously
that I guess that's his only time to shoot that shot, but also maybe, I don't know, read the room. I
But
don't know.
no, it's pretty ridiculous. But at the same time, I mean, you have a similar immediately before that with her husband. She's like, "What did you expect?" And with this guy, she's like, "Well, I don't think that'd be a good idea." This is all immediately obvious, but uh, and all are in agreement. But it's well, and there's probably something to that. I don't know how to articulate it, but it's like, I mean, these are all doomed plans. I
Yeah.
mean, back to back, so
Dexter leaves, her dad, who she seems to have a
she
much
asks
better.
him to stay, but he leaves in the middle of the night.
Yeah, like he's definitely not a perfect father, but he's also probably a better father than Gabby was a mother.
By default only.
Right,
But yeah,
by
so,
default. Her and Claire ride horses and they stare at the star again, and it had moved or gotten bigger. And then that's the end of chapter 1. And before we lead into the Claire thing, it almost seems like the entire wedding night when she's looking at the star, she's always most infatuated with like looking out into space and seeing Melancholia, right?
yeah.
And she's always wearing the wedding dress, and she never looks at like her husband with that amazement, or she never looks at her friends with that amazement. So my weird thought process is like, she's married to the idea of Melancholia, married to the idea of death,
Yeah,
and really comes into play in Act 2 when she's all naked and like
yeah, bathing in the
grooving
light of death
grooving
itself,
out,
yeah.
like
So,
she had her marriage in part 1, and then in part 2 that's the consummation. And then like
yeah,
that's just my weird thought, like she's married to the idea of the doom and gloom. She like before she even knows it's going to be like a planet that fucking hits Earth.
it does feel like sort of a fantasy wish fulfillment kind of thing, where defying all of physics and all of logic, that like the most manic depressive possibility comes to be, and
Mhm. And she's the most comfortable with it at the end.
right. So it's almost empowering, I guess, in a way, I
Yep.
mean, it's like probably the only situation in which she can blossom.
Oh, so at the beginning of part 2, John is having an argument with Claire. John thinks that Justine is a bad influence. Justine's going through some episode and she can barely even get on a taxi, so they have to call a car to take her out to take her over personally. We see Melancholia pretty big in the sky.
Right.
So like some time has passed. It's either been 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 2. Justine is coming back to the mansion. It's 5 days until Melancholia is supposed to pass by Earth. And Justine is in like the worst shape we've seen her in. She's only sleeping. She has to be drug out of bed to eat any kind of food. She can only eat like strawberry jam with her finger. But like even like her favorite,
I think it's blueberries because they're picking blueberries, and that's a little later in the film.
They first try to feed her like meatloaf, which is supposed to be her favorite, and it tastes like, which if you just I kind of laughed during that scene
I think you're supposed to, because like I did too.
Because like if you walk in, like if someone walks in on one of us just watching this movie and doesn't know that she's depressed or that what the movie's about,
right.
And you just see Kirsten Dunst be like, meatloaf, and then spits it out. It tastes like ashes.
Right.
And then the kids there like, like it's.
I thought about that.
There's a very dark humor to that scene. I'm not even sure how intentional it is, but
I don't either. But I know I laughed too. I thought about that. I'm like, I mean, I felt that way before too, and I still find it comical. I'm just like, it just seems so ridiculous, But yeah, but yeah. So that's where she's at. She can't even crawl into the bath. I'm just thinking, well, buy some stairs, right? And like a couple little stairs just to like help get her into that bath.
Yeah, or like a ramp or something. But
right. I mean, they do have those,
but yeah. So like all her comforts, so like her favorite foods, taking a bath, which always kind of seemed to be like the trick to mellow her out. She can't even get into the bath. She barely put her hand in, and then
my sister says like time and again, like, remember how you like baths, you like this, you like that, you like meatloaf, and she doesn't anymore,
So, and even for her history of, manic depression or whatever exactly she has, it's not exactly displayed. It could be a combination of things. This seems really bad because all of the cure-alls are still shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Nothing's work, and that's like when it's like major red flag territory, kind of. And the overwhelming theory is that it's going to pass right by, and John pretty much embraces that because he's like, "Oh, nothing can shit."
And maybe the idea is that people are going to be overwhelmingly inclined to whatever the more positive outcome is. People probably aren't going to want to hear that the Earth is going to be destroyed outright. So, but
And I mean, John is like fully embracing that. He's like, yes, nothing's going to shatter my perfect world. I have everything I want.
Right.
But at the same time, he's also like prepping. So like he's bringing like cases of canned food and bottles of water. And like the one thing that he kind of gives Justine in this entire movie is that, hey, you're not going to tell Claire about this, right? And then she kind of shakes her head no or whatever, and then he's like,
she doesn't react at all. But I mean, I think her silence is a no. But yeah,
either way, he's kind of says like, Claire would just worry too much about this kind of thing. So it's almost like he knows that Justine wouldn't give a fuck and would almost like embrace the chaos, I feel like, of like him doomsday prepping. It's like the first scene that they have where they're not outright arguing or he's not being shitty, though. Is what I'm trying to say.
Acknowledgement of sorts, like a silent head nod, that there's something to Justine. That
like he almost knows that Justine would be able to handle the apocalypse better than his wife.
Yeah, well, right.
Which proves to be true.
And it becomes like increasingly implausible where she knows the exact number of beans in the bottle.
Yeah, I wish that was established a little more in the first half. Like we always knew that she had like some sort of spiritual.
Yeah, like that feels like a missing scene where because her bid was open and we never hear that she actually placed it. So it's like, I mean, she could have easily heard that from somebody. I mean, there weren't many people left, but she could have.
In the second part, it's pretty like for the viewers at
maybe
home,
that ambiguity.
I guess that makes you like a little more believable when you get the push and pull of like, is it gonna miss us or is it gonna catch us?
Right.
But pretty much told out loud that Justine has these powers where she's like Rain Man. She can count shit. It's more than Rain Man. Oh, one of the more disturbing scenes of the movie, and she just would not stop beating her horse. And this horse is supposed to be another one of her favorite things. Like she says, like, only I can ride it. Earlier in the movie, she's like, I'm like his mistress. He only lets me ride him. And that's one of her also happiest scenes.
Right.
It was like that, and and the other ones we've mentioned. But even then, Kiefer Sutherland is like, well, I wrote it a couple times. Like, fuck it.
Yeah, and I think Claire wants to spare of that reality. I think the whole thing by the end of it is, I mean, she doesn't need to be spared of reality. She's fully embraced it. I mean, that's a whole idea, So I think when she sees the horse for what it is and everything else for what it is, she's.
And then, so basically, I don't think I've said it directly yet. She like beats the crap out of the horse with the horse whip, like way too much.
I can't remember the horse actually collapsed because we saw that in the intro that the horse collapsed. Yeah. It does collapse.
Yeah, it collapsed with her on it, and then Charlotte Gainsbourg was trying to wrestle the whip out of her hand, and it was a fucked up. It was one of the more fucked up scenes, hard to watch scenes of the movie.
Because it does kind of linger on that moment, like it's not just a passive thing. She is like continually beating it,
and there's not a lot of overt violence in this movie. It's just that's kind of the scene. That's That's like the disturbing one, and even the end, the ultimate violence of the Earth fucking and being engulfed is just, you know, white light kind of deal. Like you
Yeah.
can't comprehend the level of damage that's actually done. So
Right.
it's yeah.
It probably is the only thing.
Sort of after the horse beating, we see Justine sneak out in the middle of the night, and that's when she kind of has her like wedding night of sorts with Melancholia. Like she's laying out naked next to a creek. But at the very least, she's having like some like an ecstasy like fueled like experience.
Well, it's
Staring
certainly
at
the happiest we've seen her in a number of minutes. In this
definitely in
film.
the second part. Yeah, because right now she's only about Melancholia, the plant about to crash into her. At this point, though, John is still really hyped that like, nah, it's still gonna miss, guys. Like it's gonna be cool, and they have like a little
I
stick
think there
with
are
the
about 3
circle.
years of that. Like we get a sense of absolute certainty from him, and then we get doubt, and then we do the last time we see him alive in the film.
Mhm.
It's pretty clear that yeah. So
Yeah, because like, well, at least I should say like his outward appearance is different than I think what is actually going on in his head, because he is like a thinker, right? So he is curious and stuff, but like he probably just can't. He might even know, he might have even read the science and thought like, oh, that makes sense, like it's actually going to hit Earth, but he also has the dynamic where he just cannot function probably thinking that the Earth won't go on.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those things. I mean, he's supposed to be kind of the pillar of the rock, upon which Charlotte Gainsbourg character is supposed to, support herself, and it deteriorates obviously as the film goes on. Where I mean, they have the stick and wire system, and she puts everything into that, and then but by the
Uh,
last time we see him, there's an anxiety there, and then after that we see him dead. So I mean,
and real quick before that, we also see that like Claire, it like does some Googling, and she wants to do some prepping of her own. The way she preps is gets some sleeping pills or some kind of pills that if you take too many of them, you'll fucking die. Put it like in this locked drawer. So that's like something that comes into play in a sec. After she does that, we get the scene with Justine that I think is kind of the heart of the movie, where at this point Justine says, the Earth is evil, it's not worth saving, and it will not be missed. And then that's followed up by like Claire asking the question like, life might exist somewhere else, and then this is when Justine is like, no, it doesn't. And it's like, how do you know? Well, I know things. And then like the power thing comes into play, which that might honestly grow into one of my criticisms of the movie is the power dynamic. Cause like, I feel like it's either necessary or it's not necessary, right? And if it's necessary, you maybe, like you said, have a missing scene in the first part that like clues it in a little better than just looking at like a seed counter or whatever, a bean, like beans or
yeah.
but like
I think
either have it or don't. I feel like because it almost at the end doesn't feel like you could almost cut those scenes out at the end where it's like I know things, but
yeah, but I think that's also sort of the point is in the face of all logic and rationality, the worst comes to pass anyway, so it almost
yeah,
feels like it's entering into fantasy, which I think
true.
is the point, despite everything, so but I get what you're saying at the same time, where there could have maybe been at least one scene that was missing that could have hinted at
Flushed
that.
it out a little better. And then Claire also says like, well, wouldn't life on Earth be precious then? And then like if we're all alone, wouldn't life on Earth be precious? And then Justine says like, no, life on Earth is evil. Like it's a weight. Like from her perspective, every living thing, and it's true to varying degrees. Although there are some truly like cool symbiotic relationships out there between some species of animal and whatnot, is that like, life is constantly just trying to kill itself, and the most developed form of life in human beings, or at least what we perceive as the most developed form of life, we can't live with ourselves, or we can't live with other people. And you know what I mean? It's,
Right.
life is evil, life is self-destructive, life is destructive. And like the highest forms of life have lead to us. And if humans are this kind of
Yeah.
miserable creatures, like what's the fucking point?
Antichrist. I mean, the whole idea there was like, chaos reigns, in the
Mhm.
face of Willem Dafoe's, order and, and explanation and all that. It didn't really matter, and similarly, it's kind of that continues in Melancholia, where in the face of all rationality, chaos prevails. So I mean, I think it's almost sort of a sympathetic view of that, considering that triumphs over and over.
And when you were talking about John's kind of back and forth, where he does have some logical doubts, right, that come up, but John, just him and Claire toasts to life, and it just sounds very ominous. And
Right.
then she's, yeah, she picks up on it, and she starts like worrying about it. And he's like, well, there's some margins of error. I think it's moving away. It's definitely moving away, but there's margins of error. Claire's really not taking the end of the world well. And this is kind of when Justine sort of kind of becomes the more secure one. Claire's breaking down and super stressed out over the end of the world. And then Justine's just emotionless and kind of like, yeah, I mean, I've been ready for it. Claire says like, this has to be so easy for you. And Justine's like, yeah, sometimes it is easy being me.
Like, I mean, it's kind of placating, and but it is also ironic. I mean, that Justine's fucking useless up until the point of the end of the world, in which case she's very much in her own environment. I mean, she's.
But that doesn't matter anyway. There's like, yeah.
I mean, the only thing it really, she does provide probably a happier few minutes for the
For
kid.
the son, yeah. That's actually one of my last points, is like that seems like the one thing that kind of keeps her, I won't even say hopeful for life, but that's like her ethics, you know what I mean? Is like she remains ethical is an important thing about her. And then John is Claire's taking a nap the next day. It appears that Melancholia is passing them, which again, I don't get the science of like what even happens in Melancholia. They probably broke a bunch of rules.
Small, then it's big, then yeah. I mean, it's all
like I'd only imagine like it's somehow chasing the Earth, like Earth made like a curve and it lost some ground, but then it's like reconnecting like at the end of the orbit, like here, like kind of like one of these things. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. I think the whole point is just to like. I think he started with fuck the Earth and then just made that happen. Like, right?
I don't think Neil deGrasse Tyson would like this movie all that much. So the calculations, like he's looking at it and he's like, oh shit, it's actually even closer than before. And you just see him, he doesn't wake his wife. He actually tells his kid that, I think we've later figured, we don't see this scene, but the kid later says that his dad like told him like, sorry, we were wrong, son, and whatever, like had some sort of conversation with the son, but he could not even wake his wife. And he goes to the stables and he steals the pills and takes them all, when really, I mean, I don't know what the pills were. Like, did he have to take them all? I don't know. Because like it seemed like it could have been enough for her and her son to share, but he took them all, which is low-key pretty fucked up. Like, if you're gonna kill yourself like that, give your loved ones an option to do the same, I guess. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the whole point.
And the guy that's the person that's the most structured and seems like they have their most shit together is the one that loses it first, and then Claire, who's a little less, about money and about possessions and bullshit. She's still kind of loses her shit, but not to his degree.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say Claire totally lose. I mean, she's normal, average, I mean, like,
yeah, she has the normal reaction to the world ending, probably.
But there is that moment where she's telling Justine her plans. It's like, we'll have wine on the terrace, and it's like, I mean,
your plan is shit.
Right. Yeah, these are so totally different ways of thinking. And when I first watched this movie, I totally got it. That was back in 2011. This is literally 10 years later. But I still get it. I mean, I get what she's thinking, but it has no regard for her son. I think that's ultimately where Justine comes through. Is that I mean, because there's so much ceremony and ritual throughout the whole film,
and she's kind of in her own head, and there's nothing like she can even do for her son right now. But she's like, let's go build a cave, build a magic cave, and that's what you see behind me. They collect sticks. He uses the dagger to whittle them, and they make this little like teepee looking thing, and they hold hands. It is interesting that maybe it was just to comfort the son, but it's almost like it's saying this entire time, all these possessions, this huge mansion, this huge wedding, it was never necessary, like the only thing she liked in the world was her sister and her nephew, it seemed like, and Michael to some degree, but that's just complicated. This was enough, just literally like a teepee of sticks was enough the entire time. Like, but there was just so much artificial bullshit, and she probably would have been a very depressed person anyway, even if she wasn't, married to a super rich person or whatever. But there's an element there, I think. And did you think at the very end when they're like closing their eyes and the son is too like young and naive to really comprehend what's going on, so he's kind of calm, and then Justine is super calm and her eyes are wide open. Claire is kind of freaking out, and like a lot more emotional. I kind of thought that Justine, as cold and detached as she was the entire like movie, and especially this part of the movie when she's like, yeah, no, the world's fucking ending, doesn't matter, it kind of looked like she still felt like she didn't cry, but almost like she was going to cry.
No, like she doesn't have any reaction. I mean, she certainly still, as anybody would, reacting to the situation, but not.
But it's more like she's reacting to how the other people feel around her, though, which is I think like relatable thing among like depressed people, where a lot of depressed people, like you can see how the complications of things can affect your loved ones, and that makes you feel really bad, although you'll feel really bad for that person, but you're hard on yourself. If you worry about anybody, it's someone else, honestly, sometimes.
I mean, yeah, because she says she's happy for her sister, if I remember right.
Yeah, she was like, I'm happy you're happy. So she's with the people she loves, and her focus isn't even on the planet crashing into Earth. It's on them, and it's just, she is sad that they are scared.
I mean, the kid isn't. The kid seems to buy into it. I mean, it's kind of the guys with his eyes closed, but
it's like a magic cave thing, though. He doesn't buy into like. I think the kid was impressionable. I think the kid was like living in a fantasy at the end, so that's
Charlotte
why.
Gainsbourg, Charlotte Gainsbourg. I mean, obviously
and she has, well, she also has a life history, like an adult life history of events. Like her husband just fucking offed himself, like her son's gonna die right next to her. Like it's just a lot. It's a lot to take in
It's
if you're
kind of
if
that
you're
denial thing. Doesn't she say something like, "Yeah, I mean, where will my kid grow up?" I mean, she's kind of like in denial about the situation initially.
yeah.
Like, I mean, it's an irrational thing to say. Where will my kid grow up? I mean, obviously, it's fucked. Everything's fucked. But like, so, um, like,
So basically the movie ends with Claire basically dies when it hits, like freaking out. Justine's really calm, and then the kid's calm, but he's closing his eyes and thinking about a magic cave and doesn't have like 40 years of life experience to be rushing through his head. It's just like, oh, they're more impressionable. Like that's why kids can bounce back from like certain things. I don't know, sometimes
uh,
better than an adult might. And then the world ends. It officially
and
ends.
that's the end of the film. So with the world ending,
It's a pretty cut and dry movie, actually. I think it's it's
mostly.
it's abstract, but like it's not an overly complicated film. It's really well made. Like we said before, Kirsten Dunst, best she's ever done. By everything that she said, she had a good experience working with Lars von Trier. So yeah, I think she definitely could have deserved a nomination. Honestly, Charlotte Gainsbourg in a lot of movies could get nominated. Uh, would if like maybe they're a little more, accessible films, but Lars von Trier,
Well,
it is hard. It's understandably hard to digest for a lot of people.
but yeah, nothing. I mean, Melancholy is the one that most people have seen. So probably the most accessible, like you said, of Von Trier's films. I can't think of anything so. I mean, considering Von Trier, so off-putting that people couldn't,
Yeah,
get it.
I think that's one thing we mentioned in Breaking the Waves is Melancholia might be the easiest film to watch, and the world ends.
Oh yeah, yeah, remember, yeah, right, yeah, no, that's
And
probably true.
and
Yeah,
and
so
and low key, not in terms of subject matter within the movie, but in
it's
its own way, Breaking the Waves is more optimistic than Melancholia. You know what I mean?
yeah, no,
At the
but
very end.
no, it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting how that works because yeah, presentationally,
It's
you know,
fucking way more brutal.
right, but Melancholia presentationally is probably more palatable. But
Yes.
Breaking the Waves is probably the more optimistic in terms of its overall sentiment. So
Yeah. And when we're talking about optimism in a Lars von
actually, I
Trier
suppose
movie,
by default, yeah, I'm
we're,
sure you're gonna
we're
say the world, like you said, ends in Melancholia. So by
yes.
default, I think probably any Von Trier movie is probably more optimistic. So,
Right.
but
Out of 5 stars,
mm,
I'm gonna give this one 4.5. So I've actually kind of changed my mind about Breaking the Waves. I might just outright give that a 1.5, and we haven't reviewed it yet, but Dance in the Dark is probably a 5 too. But this is definitely a 4.5 for me at least. What out of 5 would you give Melancholia,
actually,
Dakota?
probably the same. Yeah, four
Okay.
and a half. Yeah. So, um,
Yeah, 4.5 is a pretty nice sweet spot where it's like definitely very good movie. Maybe just like one or two steps away from being like super great. You know what I mean? My plot criticisms would just be like, I'll give you a bunch of slack for like the science behind a lot of it, but some of it did kind of play in as a plot device just to be like, oh, see, it's actually going away. We're gonna build some suspense, and then they reeled it back in. And I don't know how any of that would work. Uh I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go too strict on that
yeah,
though.
it's kind of like a
Um
false hope that they throw at the audience. I think they keep them along, because if you're just like, I mean, if you're just like the whole world ends and everybody's fucked from the very start, people are a certain
yeah,
amount of people are going to probably leave, So
that's
uh,
true. And then my other criticism would be like, just be a little more decisive on what direction you're going with her powers. Like you said, a missing scene in the first part, or maybe just don't do that. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, you just do a little more or don't do it at all. And I think they could have easily done a little bit more, and it would have just made it fleshed out more.
It's something I didn't even notice until this viewing. Like, I totally forgot about that line where she gets the exact count of the beans. It feels like it's a missing scene or something. I mean, because it's so disposable. I mean, yeah, it's just not really necessary. You know, I felt I didn't even remember it at all. Like it, if you want to cast doubt, I feel like, yeah, you probably should build it up a bit more. Otherwise, I don't think it was really needed.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Other than that, my only thing, maybe dragging it back to a 4.5 away from a 5, would be that I feel like I'm a little more optimistic than Justine in this movie. Just a little bit.
Probably most people are.
Yeah, probably most living creatures are more optimistic than Justine in this movie.
Great.
It does what it has to do artistically. It speaks to an emotion that everybody has to some degree.
I've thought about this a lot, you know, like, I feel like the final moments probably matter the most, right? So, like, I mean, you look at Game of Thrones, you look at all these shows that have totally fucking failed at the final hour. And I feel like life is much the same way, you know, Battlestar Galactica, kind of like, you know, so, Justine wins if life is that way, right? Like, she wins the final hour, and if nothing else preceding it matters, and the final hour is the most definitive, Justine wins. So, you know,
the world ends with a whimper,
right?
But yeah, it's a really good movie. So if you like this movie, you'd like, okay, the other Lars von Trier movies aren't more accessible, but this is like a good gateway movie into
I definitely see Antichrist is the closest that I'd recommend.
You believe so?
Yeah. Callbacks to that, like
stylistically, definitely. Antichrist definitely has more by way of gore and like that kind of
in that way, yeah.
That you can't really be prepared for, but stylistically, it's the most similar for sure. It's a good gateway movie to get into some Lars von Trier, because he makes a lot of good movies. Complicated director, definitely. Complicated subject matter, not necessarily something you watch on a Friday night for funsies, but low key, maybe some Terrence Malick, The Tree of Life or something. You might like the Tree of Life.
Yeah,
it's abstract. It's different. If you're into that kind of thing, get into some Terrence Malick. You know.
Yeah. Actually, like, no, that's a good recommendation. I'd say probably the same. I can't really think of anything else that isn't.
Yeah, he's so unique, you know. But so we're gonna sign off, guys. Click the like button, subscribe, check out Satori Imports. Why the fuck not? They're not asking me to do it. I'm not getting money, but just help out a local business. Why not?
Although it's ultimately meaningless, and everyone you know will love, you know, and love will die, and everything is ashes.
But you know what? The people there are so nice.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so regardless, you know, the earth may be inevitable to oblivion.
Yes, and that song is a lie, right? Because, you know, nothing is forever but the earth and sky. But that's not even true. The earth and sky are impermanent. Nothing lasts for you. It's all dust in the wind. It's all shit. But so fucking pointless.
On that note, we can still be cool to each other before we die. Happy Earth Day.
Yeah.